So now let's look at the alphabet again, but this time let's do it from the standpoint of how are the letters actually pronounced. Now, just so there's no confusion, there's a difference between the names of the letters and how we pronounce the letters in words. Let me just make this overwhelmingly clear. When you see the word Jesus, you don't pronounce it Jesus. Those are the names of the letters, but it's pronounced Jesus. And so it's the same in Greek. When you see this letter in a word, you don't say alpha, you say A. And so this is the letter alpha, that's its name, but its pronunciation in a word is A. It's never A or A. It's A, as in father. By the way, I'm going to be using a Erasmian pronunciation here. Let me just briefly explain that there is lots of debate about not only how it was pronounced at the time of Jesus, but also how we should best pronounce it when we're teaching it and preaching it and so forth. There's kind of, on one end of the spectrum, you've got modern Greeks who, not surprisingly, think it should be pronounced like modern Greek. The thing is, of course, is that Greek at the time of Christ wasn't pronounced like modern Greek. And there are also some other aspects of modern Greek that aren't good for learning. For example, sometime in the centuries after Christ, a lot of letters went to an E sound. And so eta went to E, and omicron iota went to E. And already by the time of Jesus, epsilon iota had gone to E, and upsilon went to E. And so when you've got all these letters that are pronounced E, it's hard to tell what, if you're listening, it's hard to tell what is being pronounced here. And so for learning reasons, for pedagogical reasons, a guy in the 1500s named Erasmus tried to approximate what classical Greek sounded like. Now, most seminaries, most ministry training programs that teach you Greek, they use the Erasmian pronunciation. The problem is, first of all, it's not standardized very well. In Europe, they have one Erasmian pronunciation. In America, they have a couple Erasmian pronunciations. I'm going to be teaching you one that is fairly common and will work well. Again, I'm doing it because it's easier to learn. There is somewhere in the middle the way Greek was pronounced at the time of Jesus. There's a guy by the name of Benjamin Cantor, who's written not only this little book, but he wrote a huge, 700-800 page book in which he's used computer programming to look at spelling mistakes and try to determine how letters were spelled and words were not spelled, but how they were pronounced at the time of Christ, especially in Judea and Palestine. Maybe at the end of the video, I'll go back through this and tell you that, but I've started this video a few times, and it just gets really complicated. So I'm just going to give you the Erasmian pronunciation first as I go through these letters, and then maybe I'll just make a different video for the Cantorian early high Koine Greek that he thinks was spoken at the time of Paul and Jesus. So, without further ado, let me continue with the Erasmian pronunciation. So, this is A all the way through, all the way to modern Greek, A, as in father. Beta, we're going to pronounce in this journey B. Not a hard B, but B. Beta. This is the third letter. Notice it's not the same as English. It's not ABC. There's no C in Greek. Gamma, we're going to pronounce like a light G. Again, slightly different at the time of Jesus, but we're going to go with G because it's easy. Delta, we're going to pronounce D. Epsilon, we're going to pronounce E. So again, I'm not making it hard. This is good old Erasmus, making it easy. Zeta, we're going to pronounce Z, DZ, Zoe. And that is probably the way it was pronounced at the time of Jesus, so that works out well. Modern Greek, it's gone to Z. Eta, we're going to pronounce A, like the Fonzie, A. Again, everything went to E in the centuries after Christ, but we're going to go with A for this. I don't think I mentioned this time around that because everything went to E, there's a verse in 1 John that says, I'm writing these things in order that, is it our joy might be fulfilled, or is it your joy might be fulfilled? Well, the thing is that by the time of when the manuscripts are being copied, a few centuries after Jesus, both the word for your and the word for our had gone to himon. Now, at the time of Christ, our was probably hemon, and your was probably humon. But because of Edicism, everything went to, it went to hemon. Both of them did. But we're going to pronounce this a as an eta, and that will make it easier to recognize it if somebody says it. We're going to pronounce theta th. I'll talk more about that in my video on Cantorian pronunciation, but I'm going to go with th because it's easy. Iota, we're going to pronounce e like machine. We're going to go with e every time we see iota. Kappa, we're going to pronounce k like a k. No problems there. We're going to pronounce lambda like a l, like a l. No problems there. Mu, we're going to pronounce and nu, we're going to pronounce n. Unfortunately, that looks like a v, but it's a n sound in Greek. Xi, we're going to pronounce like an x, x, a ks, x. Omicron, I'm going to pronounce it long. I'm going to pronounce it like the O in note. The difference between Omicron and Omega, in my pronunciation, I'm going to pronounce it shorter. So, same sound, it's just a question of how long you hold it. So, Omicron we're going to pronounce like note, O, a shorter one, and Omega we're going to hold longer, oat, a little bit longer. Or let's see, what would be another example? Let me see. Oat. That might not be a good one, but note is short. O, a little bit longer for anthropos. So anthropos is human, and the anthro is the omega, and then pos at the end is omicron. Can you hear the difference in length? Same sound, but different length. Anthropos. Long omega in the middle, anthro, and then short o at the end, pos. So, omicron, the little o. P, we're going to pronounce p, like a normal P. Rho, looks like a P, but it's not. We're going to pronounce It probably had a trill at the time of the New Testament, a little bit, but we're going to go with an Sigma has two forms. Both are pronounced s, like an S in English. We're going to pronounce tau like a T. Upsilon, a lot of times I'm just going to pronounce it oo. It probably was a little bit more like a French oo or a German oo, but we're going to go with oo just because we're Americans. You may not be American if you're watching this video. Phi, we're going to pronounce like an F, although again, it was probably a little different at the time of Christ. Ki, we're going to pronounce ch. This one we can do a little like a puff, like a breathy k. But anyway, that's the key. Psi is a PS sound, and then omega, as I said, is O, like anthropos. All right, so there you have the basic letters, the way we're going to pronounce it. It's a little different from the way some of them were pronounced at the time of Christ, but that's mostly the same as how they were pronounced at the time of Christ. Now, we also have, there's all the letters, we also have things that are called diphthongs. A diphthong is where you have two sounds. So, like, if you pronounce these as a true diphthong, it would be I. So, I is two sounds, I, but they're pronounced like one, I. So, they're called diphthongs, and you have a number of diphthongs in the New Testament. They either end in an iota or they end in an upsilon. So we're going to pronounce this one as I. I'm going to pronounce this one as A, as in fate. Now, at the time of the New Testament, it probably had already gone to E, but I'm going to pronounce it A so that we can distinguish, these diphthongs from one another. I'm going to pronounce this oi. Again, you hear two sounds, oi, and like oil. And that probably was also still oi at the time of the New Testament. We, like wee or queen. Again, ooey, wee, 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 wee. Sounds a little like a pig. That's how we're going to pronounce that one. So those were the diphthongs that end in iota. Here are the ones that end, diphthongs that end in iota. Here are the diphthongs that end in upsilon. So ow, 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 ow. That's how we're going to pronounce that one. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I'm going to probably pronounce this U. Again, at the time of the New Testament, it had already gone to either ev or f. Epharisto is I give thanks. And that's probably how it was somewhat pronounced at the time of Christ too. But I'm going to go with U because it's the Erasmian pronunciation, which is easier for learning Greek. Oo, oh, 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 oo. I'm going to go with oo for this one. Then there are three what are called improper diphthongs. And the reason they're called improper is because they have this little iota hanging on for dear life. And it does mean something. The iota does have a meaning. It's different from if the letter was just there without the iota. However, for pronunciation's sake, we're just going to pronounce it like the letters on top. So a, o. We're not going to pronounce it differently. And there you have the Erasmian sounds. I'll do another video in which I talk a little bit about the way it was perhaps pronounced at the time of Christ. But that'll get us going. This will get us going for now.